Starting April 1st, Canadians will only need a prescription from their doctor to access medical marijuana. This means we could see a boom in pot smokers.
And this is the reality we're living in. Millions of people are on prescription medication, and now marijuana is considered to be a prescription medication. And as a society, we need to be able to adapt and understand the needs of those who take this drug as medication, not to get high. But there are some serious questions that need to be answered. What do you do with an employee who needs to light up during work hours?
Joining us to talk about this issue is Sheryl Smolkin, a writer and lawyer specializing in workplace issues. Sheryl, if I'm a medical marijuana user, should I be allowed to light up a few times a day, let's say, while I'm at work?
Well, I think there's one misconception. People who take medical marijuana, for the most part, don't necessarily smoke. They may use an infuser or a vaporizer or some other method of getting the drugs. So while, you know, one imagines the issues associated with smoking marijuana, there are other ways to take your prescription.
Okay, so having said that, if you had a prescription for medical marijuana and you go to your boss and say, look, you know, I've been on this drug and I've been on that drug and now I'm on this drug, it's called marijuana, but in order for me to take it, I need an infuser, I need a vaporizer, I need to be able to go and administer that. I guess like a diabetic needs to take their needle or whatever, should workplaces be ready for these types of people?
Well, I think they should be ready. Health Canada says that there's about 40,000 people using medical marijuana now, and by 2024 they estimate that there'll be 400,000 in the not necessarily in the workplace. So the prevalence is certainly going to grow, and something that perhaps an employer never had to deal with in the past might pop up.
Now, Sheryl, you know, some people can function without problems after taking this drug, but the issue of impairment might come up. What is an employer to do if impairment seems to be an issue?
Well, first of all, an employee doesn't have to tell an employer if they're taking a drug. So if you're taking Tylenol 2 and Tylenol 3 and you can function and do your job, you don't have to tell your employer. If you can't do your job and it becomes apparent, obviously the employer can start asking some questions.
But whose decision is that? The employer says, I don't think you're doing your job because you're impaired, or the employee says, you know, I think I might be impaired and I can't do this job?
Well, I think the employees certainly have an obligation, if they can't do the job, to share the information with their employers and ask for some accommodation. But there may be cases where the employee thinks they're functioning just fine and the employer notices something, particularly in a safety-sensitive environment, and then that might cause them to start asking questions.
Yeah, I mean, are there cases you foresee in which someone can be, you know, legally high and then legally fired as a result?
Well, if you're in a safety-sensitive environment and you can't do your job, the employer has an obligation to accommodate you to the point of undue hardship. So in theory, that means if they can take you off the machine and put you on the desk or have you working part-time. In practice, it may be difficult to do that, and that undue hardship is a really gray area. It's a difficult thing to prove because it is not an undue hardship, for example, if there is a financial implication to the employer, unless it's absolutely huge and unsustainable.
Sheryl, correct me if I'm wrong. There are different strains of marijuana. Some are specifically for certain types of illnesses, multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, digestive diseases. Isn't it true that these people who need to take medication can in fact take a medication which doesn't get them high, but does alleviate the symptoms?
I'm not a doctor and I don't have medical knowledge. I did take the time to speak to somebody at one of the companies that's going to be legally distributing medical marijuana. I believe that currently, with people domestically growing their own supply and buying it from small distributors, there may be different strains, but it is much more likely in future that there will be significant research done and the range of strains plus the documented information about what they do and don't do will get better. But you are quite right, there are various strains, and it also depends a lot on the tolerance of the individual concerned.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you to get a little bit general now, Sheryl. I mean, do you foresee this as being generally a good thing? Will there be greater productivity in the workplace, or something which would potentially cause a lot more problems?
I think a lot of it depends on the individual or individuals concerned and the employer and the managers concerned. If somebody is using it, incidentally, these vaporizers or infusers can be extremely discreet. It might be as small as a small pen or a phone. And when it's used this way, I understand, although I don't know from personal information, but I understand you don't even smell it. So there may be cases where it is a problem. I think it will depend on the people involved, and it remains to be seen. I know, for example, in the Globe and Mail over the last couple of days, doctors aren't really happy about this. There needs to be a real education process as to how to prescribe the drug, what it can and can't do, and what are the appropriate circumstances for people taking it. So I think there's going to be a lot of learning happening in both individuals who prescribe the drugs, people who take the drug, and in the workplace and other environments where it may have an impact.
Well, certainly something for us to keep our eye on in the coming months. Thank you very much, Sheryl Smolkin, joining us from Queen's Park.
Thanks, Sheryl.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
When we come back, famous hockey wives should not have to deal with social media assaults, Mark.
Yeah, you know what, though? It's the price you pay for being famous, or for getting married to someone who's famous, or marrying someone who becomes famous. You need to grow a thicker skin, or wear a suit of armor, or get off social media. We'll have the whole story when we come back. Stay with us.